Hey everyone, welcome to this episode of Carefulist, the podcast. I'm your host, Katie Christophic, founder of The Carefulist. Today we're talking with Jen Wagner, who is a physician, speaker. She is founder and CEO of Prosper, and most recently, she is the Chief of Health and Performance at Canyon Ranch. Welcome to the show, Jen.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
I'm so ready to get into this because you have so much background and a really good story that leads into what you're doing. And I let's just dive in.
Sure.
So let's talk a little bit about your caregiving background.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think as a physician, you kind of choose to be a caregiver to any and all that cross your path. And so I, I think for me, that was kind of a natural tendency to begin with. And then I'm the only medical person in my family. And so as my mom and dad started to get older, a lot of that to me. I have a brother that's involved and helpful, but just I was on the phone for the doctor's appointments or in person for the doctor's visits and all of these things. And then I lost my mom about a year and a half ago now, and the last
Sorry.
5 years of her life were really challenging. And my dad was for sure her primary caregiver, and I just kind of had to play secondary support from a distance, which was kind of never the plan. And
Mhm.
just trying to navigate that system was really challenging. And then finding resources for her and trying to help my dad and relieve some of that responsibility and make sure that he was taking care of himself as well.
Yeah. And I'm so glad you brought up the fact that as the medical person, you were expected to bridge the gap there. Um, for people who don't have medical training, the system is difficult. And
Absolutely.
even with medical training, if it's not necessarily your area of expertise or if you're dealing with people you don't know, I would imagine it's a different kind of difficult. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, well, I think, outside of even just the medical care is how do you figure out insurance plans and benefits and
Yeah.
where care can be provided, where it can't be. And so I think, that can be a full-time job and it turns out to be a full-time job for many people who are in this situation. And I I do think, being a physician and then being the caregiver, it puts you in this weird space where some physicians talk to you like you're a doctor and not the daughter or the caregiver that is kind of suffering emotionally with all of this. We kind of have a more almost academic conversation. And
Mhm.
then I often felt sometimes I was way too academic as the caregiver. I could just really compartmentalize what was happening and didn't let myself feel emotionally what was going on and kind of deal with it. I just kind of set it aside like I had been trained to do. And
Yeah.
I in hindsight wish I would have done some other things.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I would imagine that that is a really tough separation to make. Because of that training, it's to protect you so that you can focus and do what you need to do for your job. But then on a personal level, um, that intermingling of training and what you're feeling and dealing with
yeah.
can give you some bumps in the road.
Yeah, and I think some of that also came to how I interacted with my family. I could sometimes be very clinical, and I'm like, we just need to do X, Y, Z, or
Mhm.
this is what's happening. And I didn't realize the emotional trauma sometimes that was causing my other non-medical family members. Because I could just say, well, if this is the way it is, then we need to go do this. And they didn't process it in the same ways. And so I found
Mhm.
myself, especially towards the end of her life, really having to kind of take a step back and say, all right, I need to make sure that both sides, the needs are being met a little bit more than maybe I had at a certain period of time.
Yeah, yeah. And when you're going through something like that as a person, not the professional, um, it can be surprising no matter what kind of training you have,
Mhm.
how you respond to it personally.
Yeah.
Um, And then when you have those family dynamics at play and people are responding differently, it can cause friction because not everyone is processing and dealing with it in the same way. And it can be difficult to understand where other people are coming from.
Yeah.
No matter what training you have, that type of a situation is going to be difficult.
Yes, for sure. For sure. And I think, at least in my family, these were hard things to talk about. They were, and I think
Yeah.
they're hard for a lot of people. Expectations. And I think some of my family members had a sense of hope that I, because of my background, didn't have. And so that was sometimes hard too, that to not discourage hope in some of our family members, even though I had a better idea of big picture and long term where these issues were leading. And that's a pretty hard thing to navigate and kind of put on multiple hats at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah. Hope is a dangerous thing. It's a necessary thing, but it can also be dangerous. My
Yeah.
my husband is a lifelong New York Mets fan.
Oh, yeah.
And the thing that we say in our house a lot is it's the hope that'll kill you.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
So of course now we're chuckling about things. So I'm curious, as you were going through that process, were there moments of humor and levity? Were you able to connect in that way? Sometimes not,
Absolutely.
and that's okay too.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think there has to be you have to find the silver lining to
Mhm.
some of these processes that you go through. I've reconnected with an aunt and uncle who I was close with, but just because of age and timing and their lives and my life, just didn't see each other or talk as much as we did. And
Yeah,
now we talk once a week, we vacation together. So just some beautiful things have come out of what was a sad and somewhat premature situation. So I'm very grateful that that relationship has become stronger. Is filling a role for my kids, as this kind of pseudo, not really a grandparent, but just this super cool another adult woman in their lives,
yeah,
to be a role model and a friend and a confidant. And so I think that, that is beautiful. And we did find humor. And I think, you know, different from raising a child where there are different sets of rules. My mom passed away from dementia. And so as her mind was going, we got a lot of advice about being very restrictive with some of the things that she loves. She's a Chardonnay drinker.
yeah,
Her whole life eventually was around her like 4:30 glass of Chardonnay. And people
yeah,
are like, oh, you should really protect her brain. I was like, really? This brings her so much joy. And so
right.
we just needed to try to embrace some of those things that we knew maybe weren't physically or medically the best for her, but brought her so much joy and found periods of time that we could really enjoy with her, that she looked forward to. She looked forward to sitting down and watching the news. She had her routines. And so trying to embrace some of that and be present with her in those moments where she tended to be a little more with it. And, as probably many people who listen to your podcast know, with personality changes that can affect uh, people with dementia, that was a time when she was really friendly and really wanted to chat. And she had gone from the most independent, friendly woman, and that personality had changed a little bit. And so it was really nice to be able to reconnect with her in those times and laugh and enjoy things.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I think something that you said is very important, and that, well, two things. Being able to give them those moments of joy and consistency with who they are and what they like to do, it does bring those personality traits to the surface. My mom also had dementia. So treating them like a human being still is really
Yeah.
important. And also, on the darker side of things, there's no upside to dementia.
Right.
So in terms of having, a detrimental effect on her brain, well, the dementia is doing that already.
Right.
So, a glass of wine that brings her joy, that's that's kind of a no-brainer decision.
Right. Yeah. And yeah, so I think all of those things. And then I think it was, beautiful to see other family members step up in different ways. And also put limits on what they could do. And I think that that's really, really important too. My only sibling is not in medicine or healthcare, and some of those conversations and situations were really difficult for him to handle. And he finally felt comfortable saying, I'm going to tap out here. Like, this is not for me. This is not helpful. And so I think having him demonstrate that courage and communication kind of allowed me at times to say, okay, this is something that you can handle. I'll do the stuff that you don't want to do, but I need you to do this. And it allowed us to almost delegate a little bit better, which I think was really helpful. And
Yeah,
that's what we're
that's
finding
great.
even with my dad, who's super independent right now, thankfully, and doing really well. But we have kind of set some boundaries. And I said, I need you as my sibling to take care of these things. I'll handle this. And so it's already making the process a whole lot better.
Yeah. Well, and that's a good thing to note as well, because you've gone through a caregiving process and a caregiving journey. Eventually, more likely than not, you're going to do it again,
Yep.
whether it's with your other parent or an aunt or an uncle who doesn't have children, or a spouse, or whatever the case is. Um, Caregiving doesn't stop. So I I'm glad that you've already sort of figured out your flow and your pattern for the next time.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. So because you have this village and people who worked together, was there a piece of advice or something that someone said or did for you that you found really helpful? And that may not be the case because
Yeah.
you are
I
the
think,
physician and maybe you were doling it out.
no, I think, you know, I, I had friends that told me it's okay to not, this is going to sound kind of strange, but it's okay to not pretend to enjoy every moment that you have with her.
Oh, yes.
And I think that especially towards the end, it was a lot of, is this the last time we're going to be able to do this? And some of those experiences were not enjoyable. And I think there's a lot of pressure, especially, when things are not going in the trajectory that you would want, and you know that inevitably this is going to end with her passing away. You just try to find joy or appreciation or connection in every single thing. And sometimes it's just not there. Sometimes doing some
Yep.
of this stuff, I'm sorry, it just kind of sucks. And so um, I think having the permission to say, I really don't like doing this right now, or even saying to her, you're not being very nice to me right now. And or you can't talk to someone that way, and not excusing everything. I think that was really helpful because I was really trying to find beauty and joy and connection in everything. And it sometimes just wasn't there. And just having
Right.
that guilt and pressure taken off, then let me really enjoy the times that were joyful and that we could connect.
Yeah. Oh, that resonates so much with me. My mom spent 3.5 years on hospice,
Oh,
um, because she had dementia early in life. She was in her early 60s, early to mid 60s when it started. So there was really nothing wrong with her other than the dementia. So I use the phrase, we hit every branch of that ugly tree on the way down
yeah,
because she had nothing else wrong with her.
right.
So for the length of her hospice, every holiday, it was like, well, she's on hospice. So is this the last Thanksgiving? Is this the last Christmas? Is this the last birthday? Blah, 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 blah. And it really started to wear, I think, probably on all of us, but I'm not going to speak for everyone else. It really wore on me.
Right.
And she passed in September of 2023. So then we had Thanksgiving and Christmas right after. And I was trepidatious about it because I thought, gosh, this is the first one without her. How's this going to be? And I was overwhelmed by the amount of joy everyone had at both of those holidays. And we never really talked about it, but it was clear how much it was weighing on everyone. It is the most fun, I'm going to say it, it was the most fun we'd had during a holiday season in a long time.
Yeah. And that's wonderful, right? And
Yeah,
I think and I'm so appreciative of my friends that my mom passed away in December of 2023, right after Thanksgiving, before Christmas, kind of in that window. And so that first Christmas was rough. I mean, she hadn't
yeah,
even, it was like 2.5 weeks.
yeah,
And so, but then exactly like, and we can do things as a family that we couldn't do for the
yeah,
last few years because she was uncomfortable traveling, or my dad was uncomfortable trying to get her places, and changes in environment were really hard, and so we were, I guess, I mean, limited is probably the best word on how we could spend time together. And with that lifted, it's been really fun to see my dad get more adventurous again and do. I'm so proud of him for doing a lot of things that have been on his list to do that he didn't want to do without her while she was alive.
yep.
And
My
but
dad did
is
the same.
yeah, but now is saying, "Oh my gosh, I really want to go do these things." And he's been traveling and connecting with people, and so I agree, there is a joy there that is just palpable around the people around you.
Yeah. Well, and I think particularly in a long-term care situation with spouses or children or whoever may happen to live with that person and take care of them, if that's the scenario, they become homebound by proxy.
Right,
And so, there's nothing wrong with them, or there's things, things they're dealing with that wouldn't keep them home
right.
necessarily. And so they get that part of their life back. And there can be a lot of guilt that comes with that. But my hope for all of those folks is that it is not so much that it prevents them from going and doing the things they haven't been able to do,
100.
because they deserve to be able to live their life.
Right. I agree.
Yeah.
Agree.
So, okay, we talked about advice, and that was incredible advice. I'm so glad you brought that up, and I'm so glad they said that to you. I mean, that's incredible. Um, so this leads, and we talked a little bit about your career, but we didn't really dive too deeply into it. So let's back things up a little bit. You're a physician.
Yes.
You want to talk about that and how that has morphed over the years?
Absolutely. So, my mom was a science teacher. And so from my very earliest memories were looking at bugs or animals or things and trying to figure out how do things work. And she was
Yeah.
always asking questions about that. And so super exposed to science at a really, really young age, which I'm super grateful for. And so I wanted to be a doctor my entire life. Never strayed from that path. And was an athlete in college, went to medical school, trained as a pediatric anesthesiologist in a career I loved. And fast forward a few decades, and 2021, the hospital system, I worked in a nonprofit children's hospital system that underwent kind of a nationwide model change. And our particular hospital was one of many affected. And they were changing the where we practiced and how we were going to practice. And it just was not really aligned with my values and the lifestyle I wanted and many things. And so at that time, I pivoted out of clinical medicine and went in. I have a background in human performance prior to going to medical school, and went back into the human performance world where we were working with a lot of kind of top talent groups from different genres. So special forces, military intelligence, sport, the corporate world. and spent a lot of time meeting wonderful, amazing people doing great things and connected with a group of women. And we all said, what do we need as high performing women that is different than what is offered to high performing communities in general? So that led to founding my company called Prosper, which was really dedicated to, at first, dedicated to kind of redesigning professional development programming that is directed to really high performing women in that is somewhat industry agnostic. And
Mhm.
what we found when we got into these groups of just women and there was safety and they could be a little more vulnerable than what they could be in their day in day out careers, they just didn't feel good. It was kind of midlife, perimenopause, this, sandwiched between raising kids and taking care of aging parents, and a lot of that responsibility falling on them while having these very high pressure careers. So we ended up, while we still were doing things with leadership and professional development programming, we ended up really backing it up to say, how do we need to take care of ourselves so we can show up every day and do the hard work that we're doing and be receptive and have capacity to absorb the amazing leadership training that's available, all these other amazing opportunities that are there. But if we are over capacity all the time, we can't actually absorb that and we can't show up the way we want to and with all these different hats that we wear every day. So that's kind of what we do day in and day out. And then that work has led to my newest position, designing women's programming for Canyon Ranch and helping to bring that to people in different arenas.
Wow, that's awesome. And I mean, I am in your demographic, so all of that spoke to me
Yeah.
between the sandwich generation thing, the perimenopause thing. You know, having been in leadership, I've since left corporate America, quite frankly, because all of the other things happening personally,
Yeah.
corporate America doesn't jive with
Right.
that. um, so let's talk a little bit about the platform of Prosper itself. Can you sort of describe what goes on in there and what people can get out of it?
Sure. Thank you. So we started out as more of a B2B organization where we go into different organizations and do anywhere from like a 2 hour to a 2 day workshop, really working on resilience, which I know is kind of a hot buzzword right now. But really kind of integrated resilience that's presented from a female lens and directed really towards women, regardless of the audience that we're in front of, which has been a pretty interesting phenomenon that some of our longest term clients are actually men, and they are very appreciative of a new way of looking at things and understanding a better understanding of maybe what some of their other colleagues are going through, maybe their partners, their sisters, their parents. So it's been interesting to kind of see that development. So that's how we started. And then through that work, we had a lot of ask to people wanted more. And so we created a online platform called Prosper Together that is just a community space for anyone that wants to join that has really science-backed information about what we have coined our resilience matrix, which focuses on sleep and recovery, how we move, how we fuel ourselves, and our mindsets, and how we connect with others. And so, really integrating those four pillars together in a way that is approachable and digestible, and especially in today's world, really science-backed information. And so, I think there's a lot of noise in the wellness space right now. Some of it good noise, some of it bad noise, but I think one of the asks was how do we sort through this noise? And so this is a place where we're very careful about the content that's created there, the contributors to that content. And we hope it's a place where people can find value and answers to questions and feel comfortable asking questions. So the community piece is really important because I think many women don't have a safe space to talk about a lot of these issues. And we're hoping to create that. And so that is kind of more of our direct to consumer platform. It sits with it has news feeds, kind of like your Instagram feed would have, where we just put fun things up that we're seeing in the space or want to let people know about. There's more in-depth articles. There's pre-recorded webinars. There's chat rooms. And so it's just kind of a great space where people can come, communicate, dive into what they want, where they want to learn, can ignore what they don't want to pay attention to. So that's kind of our direct to consumer. And then we still do things with organizations. And what we have found that is so important is the ability to have some continuity. And so when we go in person with groups, we then bring them into kind of a private community on the same platform where they have access to a lot of the same information. But then we have some more facilitated discussions just with that group and create a place where they can continue their sense of community outside of their organization, which I think is helpful
Yeah.
because many people are just concerned about talking about this within their organizations. And so it gives them a safe space to communicate and ask things that then we can take some feedback back to the organizations to say, these are a few suggestions that might make things run smoother, increase engagement, decrease burnout, all of those issues.
Yeah. So when you're working with those organizations, who specifically are you working with? Is it the HR department? Is it chief of people? Who are you talking to
It's a
there?
great question. It's different in every organization. So we have one organization we work with the entire C-suite,
Okay.
and then their C-suite leaders have a group of executive assistants that support them that they wanted their own program. So we run a program
Oh,
for the
wow.
leadership, and then we run a program for the people that are supporting the leadership, who are often sometimes left out of these conversations. We focus so
Oh,
much on the
yeah.
leaders, and it's similar to being a caregiver, right? We focus so much on the patient. We don't really take care of the caregivers that are caring for those patients.
Mhm.
It's similar in these big corporate organizations. There's a lot of attention to the C-suite. They have stressful jobs. It's appropriate. But there's a whole group of people that support that C-suite that also feel that same stress and may have fewer resources available to them. So that's been a really, really fun project to
Yeah.
be involved with that group who is super eager to learn and share and try things with us. So that's been great. And then other groups, we're just starting a program with the U.S. Olympic Committee that we've worked. It's taken about a year to get off the ground, really helping their female high performance staff that really sit in a male dominated world, not only develop as leaders, but understand themselves better and then create a mentorship program and some organizational pathways to make sure that these pathways to leadership for these women in sports and sports science are established and that there's a pipeline. So when you're 22 and graduating from college and want a career in sports science, there are some places you can go to get started. And so that's going to be a really fun year-long project that we're just kicking off this month. So yeah, we work with kind of all different groups. And I would say actually very rarely it comes through HR. It usually comes through senior leadership, which is great because I feel like there's a big ripple effect to what we do. And so if we can get leaders modeling some of this behavior and embracing some of these ideas and strategies, it makes it much easier for the people around them to say, I'm gonna stand up for this meeting, or I'm gonna take a walk, or you know what, I'm gonna turn my phone off at 9 p.m. so at 10 p.m. I can get a good night's sleep. And so when the leadership starts modeling some of this behavior and some of these strategies, it's amazing the impact it has on the organization because people feel safe doing it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, what you're implementing is a complete culture shift
Mhm.
within their organization. And I love that you're doing that as someone who has worked in multiple environments, some of them good, some of them not so much. And it does come from leadership, and it comes from leadership being aware of lower level management who may or may not be modeling that behavior. Um, I have so many thoughts on that, but I'm going to curb it for now. I like that you have the private group chat feature for the platform. And I also like that you have the chat for and the community for everyone else, because as you know, especially, with perimenopause or other just life things happening, people's sleep cycles get disrupted. And sometimes you have things on your mind at 2 o'clock in the morning, and to have a place to go, even if nobody else is awake, to put down your question or say, this is what I'm struggling with. And then maybe you just get it off your mind and you can sleep. And then when you wake up, depending on time zones and everything else, people may have answered,
Yeah,
which is awesome.
exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
Thank
And the evidence-based piece is one of the big reasons I wanted to talk to you and have you on the show because I mean, anybody who has an Instagram feed who is a female from 35 to, 55, you are flooded with all kinds of, you should be buying this cream and you should be doing these exercises. And it is
Yeah.
very difficult to know what is actually helpful and people have actually researched, and it's not just something people are trying to sell to make money.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it is a confusing, complicated space. In one hand, so excited that something around women and women's health is getting this much attention. But with that attention comes people that are really there to do good and people that are there to push something on you. And I think that that is it is really challenging to navigate. I think so, and it's in defense of some of these people that are maybe doing good work and there's not a lot of research behind us because we don't have the research. There's never been the funding to look at women's health in this way. And, luckily the last administration did put money towards studying women's health and that looked like it was going to be cut and now is looks like it's going to be preserved. And so hopefully that piece of legislation and those dollars combined with this excitement and this energy to study some of these things and to correct the wrong interpretations that happen that has led to this 20-year gap in us being able to really get good information, research will start to catch up. In the meantime, I think there are really wonderful people in this space that are taking really great physiologic principles and applying them across the age span to say, okay, we know this works here. When these changes happen in female physiology, this is what we think is going to happen. And I think, with the reputation that science has got over the last 5 years and people becoming very doubtful, I think we have to remember that the purpose of science is to change, right? And to
Yes.
adapt as we learn. And so it's not set in stone. And if it was, I don't even know if we'd be here because we would never adapt. And so I
Yeah.
think having that kind of growth mindset and willingness to learn along the way is really important in this space. And so I think, my kind of spidey sense goes up when someone says, this is the one way to do it, or this is the only thing you need. I'm like, I don't agree with that. So, I think that I think we're also what we're learning is we're each very individual through this phase. And what works for me doesn't work for my business partners. What, may not work for you and what's really working for you may not work for me. And so this, at Prosper, we really push this idea of prototyping that we're going to give you the science behind it. And then we're going to teach you how to apply it, how long to stick with it, and how to change it when you're either have outgrown it because maybe you're not getting the benefit because you need to move on to something more challenging, or it's just not working for you. And that's okay. And so to try to take away this idea that if what you're seeing on Instagram or you're trying isn't working for you, it doesn't mean that you're not working hard enough or that you failed. Maybe that's just not right for your particular physiology. But I do think, it is going, we can't get it wrong if we go back to basics, which I think, anyone that says that there's a quick fix for some of this, that's also when I get a little bit skeptical. I'm like, I don't really think there's a quick fix, but I think if we can get back to the foundations and really work on those, that leads to the small change over time that has a big impact on our overall health span and longevity and the way we feel.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think people do get caught up in, well, I'm seeing this work for all these people in my feed. Well, your feed is curated to show you certain things.
Right.
So, it's not showing you, you see the five success stories. You're not seeing the 2000 that it didn't work for.
Right.
So it can feel a little defeating sometimes, right? But people do need to recognize that everybody's physiology is different, everybody's biochemistry is different. And depending on your personal situation and your environment, and I mean, there is no duplicate of you. So you
Right.
can't point someone else and say, well, that's going to work for me. They're not the same as you.
Right. Right. And I think, through this perimenopausal transition, we're all changing so rapidly that we also have to remember, even for the N of one, even for myself, what worked even a month ago doesn't work right now. And so it is this constant kind of prototyping mindset that I'm okay, let's readjust again and let's readjust again. And it's just going to be a wild ride for many of us for a few years. And that's okay as long as we, stick to the foundational principles and we understand how to make these small adjustments and we understand when to let go of something that is just not serving us anymore, which I think is a hard, a lot of us had a certain, nutrition plan or exercise plan that worked for years. And all of a sudden, when that doesn't working, we tend to just dig in and try to work harder at that same thing instead of saying, maybe it's time to let that go and try something different.
Yeah. I was just reading the other day that people who have been on anti-anxiety medication and it's worked forever, you hit perimenopause and the hormones start doing crazy things. You may notice that it's not helping as much as it did. So, any of those types of things, you need to talk to your physician.
Absolutely.
And, you know, if they're not listening to you, I, so that's my next question. If you feel like you're not being listened to, what is a good way to get their attention? Or is it time to make a change? Or maybe both? And how do you
Yeah,
figure that out?
that is, I think, the million-dollar question right now. And I think, there is a divide in this wellness community with more traditional healthcare, which I think is really unfortunate because the power is in the synergy and the integration of those ideas that, yes, if we can all practice this foundational quote unquote wellness of we do our best to eat the best we can, we do the best our best to move as much as we can, to sleep and to have the right mindset. But sometimes we need pharmacological assistance and we need our healthcare providers. We need monitoring for diseases. We need medical management for chronic diseases we might have. So it really does need this integration. And I think that's really hard when you don't feel heard by your healthcare provider. And so one is, I think a lot of healthcare providers, we have to remember, have very little to no training in this. And so they're learning alongside society right now.
Mm.
And the today's healthcare environment, we all know you go in, you have 10 minutes to talk to your provider. They have 40 patients to see that day on their panel. And taking the time to have a deep dive discussion about something they're not very familiar with is uncomfortable for them and they may seem standoffish. And so I think one is to kind of evaluate what is your underlying relationship with your healthcare provider? Like, is it pretty good? Is this a person in a relationship that you want to continue, first of all? Or is this kind of my check the box, I go get my blood pressure tested and my labs done, and we really don't have a connection? Because I think those are two different things. I know, I'm fortunate enough to have a healthcare provider that is really interested in this. And so when I go in and talk to her, she's like, what am I going to learn today? Let's sit down, let's talk about this. And we have crafted, still in our 15-minute time window, but a very productive conversation and a mutual respect that I might ask for some things that seem a little different. And she's willing to explore that with me if I can, if we can have a conversation about it. And obviously not everybody has that ability or that sophistication to have those conversations. But I think if you have a connection and you trust that person, it's probably willing to invest in that information and say, I've seen these things. What do you think?
Yeah.
And if they don't know, there are other ways to go get these things. There's commercial labs available at this point in time. I think in the menopause space, there are some really great telehealth companies that are focusing on perimenopause and really dialed into those symptoms and those treatments. And those are great resources, I think, that most people can access and find the connection and the knowledge there. So, and then even if you still like your primary care provider, sometimes it's easier and a load off of them to say, listen, I'm going to go get this part of my care here and just have that conversation. But I think alienating the healthcare community is doing everyone a disservice, because we need to be educating them and realizing that, I mean, even OBGYNs, they maybe get 2 or 3 lectures on menopause. It's just not something that's gotten a lot of attention. And while the medical education community catches up, we have to really advocate and become partners with them, not adversaries.
Yeah, completely agree. And to extrapolate this further for our audience who may not be in menopause, they may be done with menopause, it may not be applicable.
Yeah.
Um, when you're dealing with something like dementia or Parkinson's or some of these other illnesses, you can run into the same experience, right?
Yes.
I certainly did in central Pennsylvania when my mom was exhibiting dementia, especially because she was too young. We had a hard time getting good conversation. So approaching it in the way that you just illustrated from a menopause and women's health perspective, that also works for other things.
Yeah, absolutely. And that, I mean, that's such a good point. I think that, and it's interesting, when my mom, we started this process pretty early, and I remember being in the, 4-day Alzheimer evaluation and sitting with the geropsychiatrist, and he's asking questions, and, that, at least in my family, talking about mental health and talking about depression, that was something that they have never talked about. It has never been comfortable. They would
No.
never use those words. And so remembering her kind of giggling, saying, "No, I'm not depressed," and me sitting in the corner going, "Yes, you are,"
Mhm.
and so I
Right.
think even helping to facilitate that conversation between the patient and the provider, because I know my mom and my dad were both like, "Oh no, that's not a problem for us. We're not dealing with those things." And be, gaining acceptance and being able to help facilitate those conversations is so important, because there are tools to help not only the patient but the caregiver.
Yep.
Getting my dad on something to help with his anxiety through this was game changing. Uh,
Yes.
Game
Yeah.
changing. And so, really encouraging him to talk to his doctor, saying, "Dad, this is the most stressful situation you've ever been in your life. Your life partner of
Mhm.
over 50 years is failing." And
Right.
similar to your situation, not a lot medically wrong with her. And so just
Right.
watching her just kind of shrink and
Mhm.
change without I mean, even when we put her in hospice, they're like, "What's your diagnosis?" I'm like, she doesn't really have one, you know? Um,
Yeah.
and so I think that that's such an important call out, that there are, whether it's menopause or dementia or Parkinson's, there are a lot of different difficult conversations that maybe your primary care healthcare provider is not super experienced with, but I think it's worth investing in those relationships, or asking the questions to say, who else can we talk to about this? And creating that network and that team instead of just abandoning and walking away.
Right. And for our listeners who have heard some of our other episodes, we've talked about patient advocates. But if you're new to the show and you haven't heard about patient advocates, those are folks who are clinically trained more often than not, who can help to facilitate conversations between you and your provider. So typically you'll have some sort of a prep conversation and they'll help you establish goals for the visit and help you craft your questions. And sometimes they'll go with you depending on what you want them to do.
Yeah.
So if you're not comfortable being the one to ask the questions, talking to a patient advocate could really help. And, they can sometimes phone in if they can't go with you physically,
Mhm.
and sort of be that go between for you.
Yeah, that's a great resource for sure.
Awesome. Well, I think we've covered the bulk of what we were going to talk about today. So, where can people find Prosper? How do they get it if they want it?
Absolutely. So our website is www.weprosper.co. And everything's available through there. That's how you sign up for our subscription platform. You can sign up we send a free monthly newsletter if you just want to say, gosh, I wonder what they're up to. Nothing else, like if you sign up for the newsletter, you don't get spammed with anything else. It's literally a once a month newsletter. I think it's really important to note.
Yes.
Yeah, so everything can be found there. And, the community is growing and changing every day. And we try to not overload it with content, but kind of drip it in. And so new stuff is always constantly being put in a little piece at a time.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Jen. Is there anything else you want people to know about your company or about caregiving or seeing their physician?
Oh, no, thank you so much for having me. I just think that, give yourself grace through all of these processes, whether it's caregiving, whether it's your own personal transitions, and it's a long road, and we have to take care of ourselves during that time, and not to forget that. And that's not selfish. That's not kind of negating responsibility or dedication to other things. But if we are not taking care of ourselves, we cannot show up and take care of others in the way we need to, and then continue to live after as well. And so,
Right.
the last thing, and so I think, taking care of ourselves through these transitions is vitally important.
I'm so glad you said that because it is really easy to lose sight of the fact that there is life beyond caregiving. And whether someone gets better or they don't, you will continue. And what does that look like? And how can you take care of yourself so that it is the best version of you
Yeah,
when that time comes?
absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing all of this amazing information and a wealth of resources on your platform. So, for those of you who are listening at home, we will be adding Prosper to our site for resources, and you can find them on their social. And if for some reason you can't find them, you can always reach out to us at www.carefulist.com and hit that contact button, and we will get you the information you need. So, thanks for joining us today. And until next time, take care.